There are days you never expect that a morning coffee might be the only thing holding you together. And for me, that day came one December morning on the 12th floor of a glass building in downtown Seattle, the place where I had spent 8 years of my life turning an unknown company into one of the most sought-after creative agencies on the West Coast. My name is Lindsey Vonn, and I used to be the head of brand strategy at Lure and Rise, a firm that specialized in emotional marketing, where each campaign we built was treated like a living work of art, reaching deep into the hearts of our audience. I was never the kind of person who craved the spotlight, but my work always left a mark, from the viral ad Mom's First Flight for a budget airline to the campaign Real Value in Every Meal that pulled a clean food brand out of a PR crisis. I was used to being behind the scenes, yet sensitive enough to feel it when someone began quietly pushing me off stage before I had even taken my final bow. Everything began to shift when the company announced its plan to go public. Meetings doubled overnight, unfamiliar names crept into CC lines, and ideas I had once written began resurfacing in a tone that wasn't mine. I wasn't being paranoid, just experienced. I could smell manipulation the moment it started to ferment. Harper James, a new hire from a major New York firm, had a way of speaking that made it feel like everything was already in her control. Harper was sharp and clever and knew how to make others feel small. She didn't remove me outright, just gradually edged me out of decision-making, rerouting the strategy team to report directly to her under the pretext of structural optimization. At first, I told myself it was a transitional phase, but it became clearer when our campaign, Home is Where Trust, lives something my team and I had nurtured for 5 months, was presented to the board as her own initiative. I sat there, back straight, heart clenched, but unmoved on the outside. I had heard of credit theft in the industry, but I never imagined it would happen so blatantly. Right inside the executive boardroom, a room that had once trusted me to shape the soul of our brand. I brought this to Julian, Lure and Rise's CEO, who had once believed in me during the rough early pitching years. He looked at me as if he couldn't process my words. Lindsey, sometimes work is about the team. Not everything needs a name on it, he said, eyes glued to the screen. That was when I knew he had chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. I was excluded from major meetings, stripped of budget approval, and my name vanished from press materials. A month later, during a team meeting, Harper announced a new organizational structure, dissolving the old department and forming a creative thinking hub without me in it. I was reassigned to the role of project strategy consultant, a title with no authority, no budget, and most importantly, no voice. The day I signed off on my last project was the day I knew this company was no longer mine. I thought I would feel relief, but instead, I felt hollow. That night, I came home late to my Capitol Hill apartment. It was dark and cold. I turned on the lights and made a cup of tea I never drank. On the desk was a pitch deck I had once prepared for a client, now meaningless. My phone lit up with a missed call from Briley. I didn't answer. I knew my sister would ask a few vague questions before switching topics to the design studio Mom wanted to fund for her. My family had never truly understood what I did. Not until Forbes featured me, and they branded me the successful one in the family, but the last time I visited Spokane. My mother dismissed my talk of emotional data in media with a cold. Emotional marketing. Does that help you get a husband? I laughed, but something inside me cracked. I had always tried to prove my worth through work, through results, but to them, I was still just the girl working too hard with no one beside her. 2 weeks later, I received an email from HR titled Contract Termination Agreement. No warning, no meeting, just a cold PDF file. It thanked me for my contributions and stated that our collaboration would end immediately. I sat still. My heart didn't race. I didn't panic. Just a long, sharp silence. That was the moment I knew I had been betrayed, not just by Harper, but by the company that once called me its strategic soul, and by Julian, who once brought me into the founding team. Now silent as I walked away, I packed up my desk on a quiet afternoon. No one said goodbye. A few personal items, some prototype samples, an old photo with my original team, and a forgotten cup of coffee gone cold before I left the building. I looked up at the lobby sign, Lure and Rise. It used to be a dream. Now it was just a name, as I stepped outside. The rain began, soft but cold, and the December wind swept through my hair like it was washing away any trace of me. I no longer belonged to them, and what hurt most wasn't being let go, but realizing how easily trust could be erased. At first, I didn't think I would start over, at least not right away, after leaving my former company. I spent entire weeks just sitting by the window, staring down at the damp streets of Seattle, where the sound of buses mixed with the rain like a never-ending background score. Mornings blurred into cold coffee on the table, hesitant check-in messages from old colleagues, and polite partnership emails that felt more like gestures than real interest, all of which reminded me that I still held value, just no longer in the orbit of Lure and Rise. But it wasn't anger that pulled me to my feet. It was the quiet, aching emptiness that did. One afternoon, as the light tilted through the curtains, I reopened a half-finished strategy draft from a scrapped project, a brand campaign for a handmade perfume startup in Portland that had been dismissed for lacking commercial appeal. I reread the old lines and felt again the breath of marketing that existed to tell stories, not just to sell. And I knew then I wasn't done yet. I started in my small apartment, turning the dining table into a workstation and old folders into the foundation for a new model I tentatively called Reframe. It wasn't meant to be a traditional agency, but a strategy consultancy for small brands, people with stories worth telling, but no budget for a big agency. I called it unvarnished emotional marketing, where feeling mattered more than data, and truths were spoken in the voice of the brand itself, not buried in a slide deck. I designed a simple logo, built a landing page in 2 days, and sent my first emails to a small list of past collaborators, not pitching, just sharing a story and perspective. The replies were few, but enough to assure me I wasn't speaking into a void. The real test began when I got my first call from a small candle company in Tacoma. They were reeling from a crisis over sourcing transparency and didn't know how to rebuild. I spent the week at their workshop, talking to the founder, listening to how her mother once hand-blended oils for church ceremonies, breathing in the unfinished batches left behind. From that, I shaped an entirely new brand story, one that didn't dodge the past, but used it as a place to begin. It was the first time in months I felt the real rhythm of the work I loved. That campaign never went viral, never made headlines, but orders tripled after we told their product journey through a simple, self-shot video, no polish, no professional lighting, just a daughter speaking about her mother and the candles they lit in their first winter without her. Projects like that began to trickle in, all through word of mouth, no fame, no office, but there was trust. I worked through all hours, sometimes forgetting myself in the process. One night, while editing product descriptions for an organic tea brand in Colorado, my vision blurred and my heart raced out of rhythm. I collapsed onto the desk and woke up at 3 a.m., neck stiff, tea cold beside my hand. I realized I was trading away my health for a comeback with no promised destination. But I also knew that if I stopped, I'd stay trapped in the what if that lure and rise left behind. Things didn't get easier. One morning, a message from Briley, my sister, popped up with just one line, "Mom's in the hospital." I dropped everything and took the first bus to Spokane. The suburban hospital was cold, the long hallways echoing a distance my family never quite named. Mom wasn't in danger, just a spike in blood pressure and chest pain from stress, but sitting by her bed, watching her breathe lightly with her eyes closed. I found myself back in the same old role, the daughter who took care of things, never asked, never demanded. Briley sat on the other side scrolling her phone, occasionally glancing at me, saying nothing. Between us stretched a silence built over years, and I didn't have the strength to unpack it. "On the way home," Mom said, "I heard you left your job. Maybe it's time to think about something more stable." I nodded, offering no explanation. To her, stability meant being part of a system, an office, an employee ID card. What I was doing still felt like drifting, back in Seattle. I received an email from someone who had interned with my team 3 years ago. He wrote, "I'm building a mental health app for the LGBTQ+ community. I don't have a budget yet, but I need help with brand building. Could you possibly guide me?" I read it over and over, not because of the request, but because someone still remembered me as someone willing to share. Without conditions, I said yes, not for profit, but because I believed this was what I was meant to do. 3 weeks later, the product launched with the message, "We deserve to be heard," the right way. And the intro post was shared over 20,000 times in one night. A tech blog called it a brand built quietly, but impossible to ignore. I looked around at my makeshift office, still the same old dining table, now with a small whiteboard, a few sticky-noted notebooks pinned to the wall, and a desk lamp that stayed on deep into the night. There was no spotlight, no fanfare, but there was trust, slowly being mended from the inside out. I began learning how to live with less, but deeper. No more impulsive shopping, no more paying for dinners to preserve surface relationships. I learned to choose who entered my life the same way I chose clients by their true values, not their promises. That was when I received a strange email. The sender was an HR director from a media firm in Chicago. "We heard about your model from a former client. Would you be open to consulting on a national rebranding campaign?" I stopped at that line. A national campaign meant everything I believed in would be tested on a real stage. I didn't respond right away. I just sat in the soft glow of my desk lamp, realizing that this quiet little startup of mine had just arrived at its first major turning point. I once thought I had stopped caring about Lure and Rise, that everything connected to that company had become a faded memory tucked away in a closed drawer. But some things find their way back to you even when you don't go looking. A few weeks after I accepted the offer to consult on a national rebranding campaign in Chicago, a trade magazine headline on LinkedIn made me pause. The article reported that Lure and Rise had just lost a $7 million contract with a major bottled water brand due to a lack of depth in brand storytelling and emotional connection. A short statement, but it struck directly at the heart of what I had once brought to them. And there it was, Harper James's name printed at the bottom as a cruel counterpoint to the truth. I didn't laugh, didn't feel smug, only sensed something old beginning to fracture beneath the silence I had tried to preserve. That same evening, a message came in from Maya, a former colleague. "They're scrambling. Lindsey, my project was canceled, and Harper's been snapping at the team. Even in front of clients," I typed back. "Are you okay?" She replied with a single sad emoji. Maya had once interned under me, carefully noting every detail in meetings. Someone who believed marketing was meant to connect, not manipulate. Knowing she was still there stirred a quiet ache in me. but I understood not everyone gets to walk away when the house is falling. One afternoon in a 6th-floor meeting room in Chicago, while I was presenting the concept of emotional resonance experiences to rebrand a federal agency, a legal advisor across the table asked, "Weren't you the strategy director at Lure and Rise?" I nodded. She smiled slightly. "We once considered hiring them. Lucky we didn't." Her words were light, but carried the quiet force of a shifting tide. It didn't make me proud, just made me realize that vindication doesn't always come from fighting back, but sometimes simply from standing still and letting others remove their own masks. I flew back to Seattle that weekend with draft contracts from 3 new partners in my bag at my usual coffee shop in Capitol Hill. I opened my inbox to find an anonymous message titled Harper's Pitch Deck. Inside was a slide presentation nearly identical to a deck I had created 2 years earlier, only with a different logo and minor wording tweaks. I checked the metadata and confirmed it was an old document reused. What surprised me wasn't being plagiarized again, but how clumsily they had recycled something that no longer had life. A knot formed in my chest, not from pain, but from disappointment. Disappointment in a system I once nurtured, now reduced to a soulless imitation. I saved the file into a private folder labeled Evidence, not to sue, but to remind myself never to return. A week later, Maya asked to meet for tea at a small shop near Lake Union. I saw something shift in her eyes, a mix of gratitude and anxiety. She told me Harper was restructuring again, pressing hard on neutral team members. While Julian had seemingly withdrawn, she wanted to leave, but wasn't ready. So she asked, if I quit, "Would you mind if I asked to work with you?" I looked at her for a long time before answering. "I don't hire people running away, but if you're ready to rebuild, the door's always open." She nodded, tears pooling not from emotion, but from understanding that this wasn't an invitation. It was a challenge. In early March, a feature appeared in Fast Company titled, When Emotion Speaks, the story of Lindsey Vonn and Reframe. I hadn't submitted it. It came from a journalist who had followed our Chicago campaign and wanted to share my journey as a possible blueprint for the creative industry. The article spread quickly, and soon I began receiving inquiries not only from small brands, but from mid-sized and even large companies seeking a more human approach. One email from the brand director of a Texas home appliance company read, "We used to work with Lure and Rise, but lately their campaigns feel hollow. Maybe it's time for a shift." I didn't reply immediately, just saved it in a folder marked consideration, but I understood what it meant. In a call with my attorney, Raymond Carter, the same one who helped me navigate post-resignation legal matters, he said, "I can send a cease and desist for the reused material. If you want." I paused, then shook my head. "I don't want to be pulled back into that game. I don't need credit returned. I just want to build something they'll never be able to copy." He nodded, approving the clarity. Then one spring morning, an email arrived from Julian. The subject line read, "Can we meet?" I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a vague, roundabout apology, admitting he had mishandled internal conflicts and expressing interest in reconnecting as partners. If possible. I didn't respond. I needed time to process what I felt. It wasn't anger anymore, but a cold, clean calm. I printed the email, placed it on my desk, and looked at it like a lesson, not a lesson in forgiveness, but in boundaries. I never met Julian again, but I wrote myself a new rule. Not everyone who once needed you deserves a second chance to have you. During an internal Reframe meeting, now a team of 5, including Maya, I outlined a plan to expand into education and mental wellness sectors. The room was silent, then filled with nods. No one asked. Are we sure? Because we all knew that in this journey. The only certainty is holding on to truth. I watched Maya jot down notes and knew she had stepped beyond her old shadow. I looked at myself and saw someone no longer defined by stolen credit, but by the name she was now rebuilding without needing anyone's permission. That night, I walked through Seattle's old quarter. The stone streets glistened with dew, like they still remembered the weight of past footsteps. I wasn't searching for what I had lost. I was simply moving forward, this time on my own terms. The night wind didn't chill like I remembered. It carried a gentle scent of freedom. I looked up at the sky and didn't hope to be seen. But if anyone ever asked how I found my way back, I would say only this: I didn't come back. I kept going. And that has been the quietest, deepest revenge I've ever known. There is a very specific feeling when you realize you're no longer afraid of being seen. When you stop shrinking yourself in every room just because the past once broke you. That morning, standing in front of the mirror with pillow lines still pressed into my face and sunlight spilling in through the window, I felt something clear. I wasn't just coming back. I was ready to step forward, not because anyone dared me to, but because I no longer needed to hide. Reframe was now strong enough to run without me handling everything. My small team had started managing client meetings on their own, proposing ideas and defending them with a calm confidence that gave me peace. For the first time in nearly a year since being pushed off the board by my old company, I wasn't holding on out of fear of losing it. I was choosing to keep building what I still believed in. The message from the Federal Department of Education came on a quiet Tuesday morning, brief and formal, inviting me to submit a proposal for a nationwide media campaign aimed at rebuilding student trust after the pandemic. They asked for something emotionally resonant but never sentimental, inspiring but free of false ideals. I read it 3 times to make sure it wasn't a mistake. Among the list of competing firms, I saw Lure and Rise. The name didn't hurt anymore, but it made my fingers pause, not because I wanted to beat them, but because I saw a chance to rewrite the way I was once forced off stage, not for the spotlight, but to simply stand present with honest worth. I printed the notice, pinned it to the whiteboard in our office, and wrote above it, not for revenge, but to show up with truth. I called Maya in, shared the invitation, and asked if she was ready to lead the concept team. She nodded without hesitation, her eyes no longer nervous like when she first left Lure and Rise. I made it clear, if we were going to do this, we couldn't mimic anyone else. No recycled words, no flashy declarations. We needed to tell a story only we could tell, no hollow grandiosity, only meaning. Internally, we named the campaign Learning Again, but its soul was this: we believe you still have something worth believing in. We rewrote every line from the eyes of the children left behind, the exhausted teachers, the overwhelmed parents, and even those within the system who had lost the pride in what they built. The demo video was a sequence of real moments, tired eyes trying to focus, the scratch of pencils on paper, light filtering through dusty classroom windows, and one soft question whispered into silence. What helps you believe again? We use no celebrities, no emotional soundtrack, just real stories in real voices. And that is what brought Reframe's proposal to the final round. In the live presentation, I walked into a government boardroom where 6 officials waited, wearing a muted earth-tone sweater and carrying only my laptop. No elaborate slides. I opened the demo link and let the quiet footage play, casting its dim light across faces used to polished, empty pitches. When it ended, no one clapped, but one person wiped their eyes with a sleeve, A representative stood up and said they would need more time to review. I couldn't tell if it was a good sign, but I left with a kind of peace I hadn't felt before, because I had done it right, regardless of the outcome. 2 weeks later, while adjusting strategy notes for a Vermont herbal tea brand, the confirmation email arrived. The subject read, "Congratulations. The Learning Again campaign has been selected." I stared at those words for a long time, not out of surprise, but because I understood. This journey was never about proving anyone wrong. It was about showing myself I was right to stay silent, to rebuild instead of retaliate. Maya ran into the office just as I cast the email onto the big screen. She shouted, but I only smiled, a breath of quiet joy. Outside, the early summer wind in Seattle had softened. I stepped onto the balcony and looked over the city from the 6th floor, the place where I had rebuilt everything from empty hands. A call came in from an unknown number. I answered. Harper's voice sounded softer than I remembered. She said, "I heard Reframe 1. I just wanted to say, if there's any reason to work together again, we'd be open to it." I stayed silent. She waited. I said, "I wish your company the best." Then hung up. No explanation needed. No score to settle. Harper was no longer someone I needed to convince. She and the system she once represented now had to face what they once dismissed as lacking vision. I knew Reframe had become part of a new way forward, one where success wasn't measured by budget, but by the depth of true connection. That evening, I rewrote our company's original mission memo not to celebrate, but to remind the team that we were born from hurt, but sustained by kindness. I wrote, "We are not those who run from pain, but those who walk through it, so no one else has to start over alone." Then I shut the laptop, poured a glass of mint tea, sat on the floor, and leaned against the window. No music, no notifications, just me and the soft light of the day's end. I didn't feel like I was making a comeback. I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. And maybe that is the most powerful kind of comeback there is. There's a strange feeling that comes over you when you step into a room full of people who have no idea you were once pushed out of a seat like this. But you remember every detail of the day you were sidelined. The difference is that this time, no one had to offer you a place you walked in as the official lead. The launch event for the Learning Again campaign was held at the Paramount Theater in downtown Chicago, where hundreds of representatives from educational institutions across the country had gathered as I stepped onto the stage. The lights were soft, just enough not to strain the eyes. I looked down and saw Maya in the second row, flanked by 2 young team members. Their eyes didn't beam with pride, but with something deeper, something that made my heart slow for a beat. It was trust. The speech was brief. I didn't talk about Reframe or my personal journey. I spoke about the children who had to learn through screens, the teachers who went a year without hugging their students, and what happens when we don't just teach, but also listen. The rest was images, real voices, real footage, no digital effects, just life. When the video ended, I didn't expect applause, but it came anyway, steady and clear. Some stood, some wiped their eyes, and in that moment I knew, without confrontation, the truth could still shine. Around the same time, I received an email from an advertising journalist. The subject line read, "Harper James resigns from Lure and Rise after a series of strategic failures." I read every line without feeling joy, not because I wished she had stayed, but because I understood the feeling of falling from a place that once named you as essential. The article said Harper had failed to retain major clients, that recent campaigns were criticized for being hollow and disconnected, and that the company's leadership had admitted the old storytelling methods no longer suited the new market. in a list of names mentioned as part of the new wave. Mine appeared under an old photo of me from a San Francisco conference. The caption read, "She restarted with a small model and is now shaping the industry." I saw that line and remembered the night I packed my desk, hands trembling around an old photo frame. They don't tremble anymore. Now, I just feel calm after the event. New partners reached out not because we stood out, but because we made them feel understood. A documentary studio proposed a short series on the return to classrooms after the pandemic. A tech startup in Boston invited me to consult on education strategy, but one email made me pause. It was from Julian. Just one line: "I was wrong to let you go." No explanation, no reason, just a short admission. Too late. I didn't reply, not out of anger, but because I no longer needed validation. People think revenge means making someone suffer, but I believe the harder truth is when someone realizes their loss and knows it can't be undone. I decided to hold an internal reflection session at Reframe, not to celebrate, but to look back. Maya suggested we call it "What We've Been Through." In a small meeting room with warm yellow lighting, we shared pieces of our journey. There was laughter and pauses when someone reached the part where they almost gave up. I talked about writing strategy from my dining table, where cold tea had been my only companion, and about the day Maya called the first sign that trust was returning. No applause, none needed. The real recognition was that we were still sitting here, together. After that, I accepted an invitation to speak at a national conference on creative entrepreneurship. I titled my talk, "Success as Revenge Doesn't Require Winning, Only Staying True." I spoke about holding on to truth in a world where everything, even your identity, can be redefined. I shared how Reframe hires not by resume, but by asking, where were you once misjudged and how did you move past it? I ended with an open question. If you had to rebuild everything from scratch, would you do it the same or differently? The hall fell silent. That silence was something I treasured, because I knew if anyone there had ever been betrayed, ever pushed out of a dream they'd poured time and trust into, they would understand. That silence was the first echo of return. By year's end, we moved Reframe's office to a restored wooden house in North Seattle. There was no big sign out front, just a wooden door with a hand-carved logo. Along the hallway walls were photos from our first campaigns, handwritten notes from clients, and a line etched into the wood at the far end. True value doesn't need to shout to be seen. I walked that hallway every morning not to search for inspiration, but to remind myself that the reason we began was never to prove a point, but to live gently with the part of ourselves that was once hurt. One winter afternoon, as snow dusted the roof outside, I made tea and sat down to write in my journal. I didn't write to recount victories, but to record what I feared most, losing myself while trying to be seen. I wrote, "Not everyone who leaves us is cruel. Sometimes they're just moving too fast to notice what they're stepping on, but that doesn't mean we must bow so others can pass." When I closed the notebook, it was already dark. I stood, turned on the lights, and watched the room gradually brighten. No stage lights, no applause, just enough light to clearly see every face on the team, every quiet smile when a tagline gets approved, every empty chair now filled with trust. If someone were to ask whether I forgave Harper, Julian, or the system that once cast me out, I wouldn't answer right away. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give to others. It's a door you open for yourself so you can move forward without carrying the weight of anger. I'm not angry anymore, but I haven't forgotten. I've simply chosen not to let it define my path. And if you're hearing this story, maybe you too were betrayed. Maybe you were cut out of a dream you gave too much to. If so, I just want to say this: a powerful comeback isn't about being celebrated. It's about the day you can look at everything and say, I'm still here, my way,